The Prize Pelt, The Tale of Bossk, by Kathy Tyers. Chewbacca and Solo had bested Bossk once. Never again. The lizard-like Trandoshan bounty hunter paused in his research to visualize bringing in Chewbacca's pelt. The thought made him flick his tongue with pleasure. Like a trophy fighter in top condition, Bossk was massive enough to challenge a Wookiee, but he would win this game by guile, or trickery if need be. Bossk stood on an inner deck of the Imperial Star Destroyer Executor, hurrying to read an Imperial data screen. Squinting, he swung aside his blast rifle, an elaborate neck sling, suspended it under his left arm, and pushed his face closer to the screen. Onboard lighting hurt his super-sensitive eyes, and the screen was only marginally brighter than the corridors. He had trouble picking up any contrast. Another list appeared. Known antagonists: Big Bungie, former associate; Jabba the Hutt, former employer; Pluvo 2-for-1, former associate. Bossk flexed his toe claws against the Executor's deck. Chewbacca and Solo would be crazy to hide among their enemies, but Solo was notorious for trying crazy tricks. Lord Vader's personal aides had furnished volumes of data to all 6 Hunt finalists. Somehow Bossk must discover the clue that would lead him to Chewbacca first. And Solo. He tightened his fingers, curling massive wedge-shaped claws into his palm. His hands were not nimble, but strong, with deeply ridged, mature scales. He had hunted Wookiees for over 60 standard years. When a blaster or grenade finally killed Bossk, his death would shower hundreds of Jagannath points onto the bloodthirsty eternal scorekeeper that he worshipped. Serene behind her pale, lidless eyes, the scorekeeper existed beyond time and space, numbering every deed of each Trandoshan hunter. She could zero his life tally if he were shamed or captured. She could double it if he brought home a prize pelt. Ambushing Chewbacca was Bosk's sacred obligation. He punched another button and scrutinized Vader's information on Pluvo 2-for-1. The humanoid crime lord had ordered Solo's termination. Nothing else on the screen sparked Bosk's hunting intuition, except, faintly, the fact that Solo had been last seen by Imperials on Tatooine, near Jabba the Hutt's headquarters, immediately before he started running with the Rebel Alliance. That idiot Greedo had missed him cleanly. Bossk remembered seeing him afterward at Ord Mantell. Bosk's warlike people had allied early with the Empire. A Trandoshan official had conceived the idea of enslaving the huge, strong Wookiees, inhabitants of Kashyyyk, for manual labor rather than leveling Kashyyyk by bombardment. The Empire had pounced on the idea. The despicable, peace-loving Wookiees had been taken before they guessed the true meaning of enslavement. Now very few free Wookiees lived off Kashyyyk. And Lord Vader wanted Solo, Chewbacca, and their passengers alive, no disintegrations, which guaranteed they would be handled cruelly. After the Empire finished punishing Chewbacca, Bossk would buy back Chewbacca's pelt. He would take it home and lay it on the scorekeeper's bloody altar. First, though, he must find better clues. Solo and his crew had disappeared in mid-chase, leaving no trail, and he had stiff competition. Tinian Ayat pushed her red blonde hair behind one ear and then crouched to look a furry brown Chadrafan in the eye. That made it hard to ignore his 4 nostrils and his twitching, pushed-up snout, but she wanted to make sure the cowardly creature understood. 200 credits, she repeated. All you have to do is introduce me and Chenlambek to Bossk. Tooty Snibbet tilted his head to look up over at Tinian's shoulder. A silver-tip Wookiee towered behind her. Chen Lambeck had frightened Tinian, too, when she first met him. Other hunters called Chen Lambeck a fierce predator, prone to berserk rages. He only accepted dead or alive assignments, and generally only brought back proof of decease. He wore a heavy reptile hide bandolier studded with bowcaster quarrels, alternating with decorative silver cubes. He was Tinian's negrer. In his language, the term meant clan uncle. He was the master hunter who held her apprenticeship. "Trandoshans hate Wookiees," Tootie gibbered. He had explained that he too was a bounty hunter, but Lord Vader's screening crew had declined to hire him. "We're fellow hunters," Tinian told him. They'd arrived on board the Executor just too late, deliberately so, to be scrutinized by Lord Vader for the big job. "Get Bossk to promise he'll abide by the creed, then introduce us." According to the hunter's creed, no hunter could ever kill another, nor interfere with another's hunt. Tootie's reluctance seemed false, anyway. Tinian had spotted him talking with the sinister, armored Boba Fett a few minutes ago. She'd overheard him offer to assist Boba Fett in any way that he could, for a small fee. Boba Fett had apparently hired Tootie to send Bossk off in a direction that would lead him away from Han Solo. She and Chen would gladly cooperate. "$250?" Tootie batted one of his huge round ears. Tinian glanced over her shoulder. Chen gave a low growl. "$210, she answered Tootie. "Final offer." Tootie Snibbet held out a long, knobby hand. "After you introduce us. If we survive," Tinian smiled without humor. The Chadrafan scurried away. Tinian straightened. "I don't know what Boba Fett is paying," she told Chen Lambeck, "but that fellow is practically salivating." Chen howled softly. "I'm ready," she answered. "Are you?" He crossed his long arms over his bandolier and leaned against a bulkhead, looking perfectly relaxed. "Of course you are," she admitted. "You're always ready." She had apprenticed to Chen Lambeck, hoping to hurt the Empire before it caught her. It had destroyed her life. She'd been an armament heiress. Now she had nothing. Chen Lambeck was no conventional bounty hunter, though. Under the cover of Dead or Alive, he had helped several acquisitions escape to the Rebel Alliance. He played a dangerous double game, but satisfying and profitable. This would be her third job as his apprentice. Tootie Snibbet careened around the corner, clasping his hands in front of his dirty brown robe. "He agrees," burbled the Chadrafan. "But be careful. I want you to live to pay me." "Naturally." Tinian tugged on her ship suit to straighten it. Suits that were long enough in the waist always hung loose on her. She wore no decoration except a diagonal silver hip belt and blaster. As soon as she walked around the corner, she saw the creature. Bossk had to be at least 1.9 meters tall, very nearly as big as Chen Lambeck. His prominent scales looked faintly orange on one side, but over the rest of his body they were greenish-brown. He wore an orange flight suit that had obviously been designed for shorter-legged humans, ending near his knees with a pair of bullet bands. A blast rifle dangled from his neck sling, casually steadied over his left arm. Tootie Snibbet waited a respectful distance from the Trandoshan, flapping his round ears, looking more like a mouse than a lizard. He stood only half Bossk's height. Bossk's data station was at the edge of a large open space, close to the Executor's launch control center. Approachable from three sides, it was a hunter's nightmare. Heavy metal conduits festooned adjacent bulkheads and overheads with massive military texture. Mighty Bossk, Tooty stammered. This is Chen Lambeck, a hunter of great reputation, and his apprentice, Tinian. Hissing, Bossk thrust his right claws toward his blast rifle. Hunter's creed, Tooty squeaked. No shooting. You three must talk about Chewbacca. Bossk snarled. Chen Lambeck, you are distinguished for so cowardly a race. His basic sounded to Tinian as if he were trying to gargle while somebody choked him. Chen struck his deep chest with a fist and growled. Tinian stepped forward. Both hunters towered over her. He says that your reputation also precedes you. You have killed dozens of his people. Hundreds, Bossk corrected her. Chen Lambeck growled again. This time, Tinian opted not to translate. Tooty Snibbet looked all around, probably eyeing bulkheads for hand and toe holds. Anyway, he exclaimed quickly, Bossk got the job, but Chen Lambeck has information on a wonderful inside track. I thought I would do both of you a favor and introduce you. He waved both furry arms. Bossk muttered in a language Tinian didn't understand. Please listen, Sir Bossk, Tooty spoke up. Chen Lambeck arrived on board too late to apply for this hunt. Lord Vader wants this quarry alive, Bossk interrupted. No disintegrations. He specified clearly. Yes, yes, squeaked Tooty. But listen, Chen Lambeck will postpone his massacre once, if you, mighty Bossk, could work with a Wookiee. And a human? Bossk lowered his scaly head and hissed. A small, weak one, Chen Lambeck answered angrily. Tinian folded her arms. Chen says, she explained, she has been useful to me in situations requiring translations into Basic. And I've almost qualified for full hunt status. Bossk let his blast rifle dangle. Chadrafan, I will talk with this team instead of shooting them. Leave us. Tooty backed around the corner. Tinian almost envied him. At least 5 of the 6 bounty hunters would finish the Millennium Falcon job with empty pockets, and she and Chen might fail in their own mission, but Tooty Snibbet had just accumulated enough credits to enjoy himself for 3 or 4 weeks, maybe even the rest of his life, if he didn't spend quickly. Bossk waved at his terminal to hibernate it, then leaned against the bulkhead. He was less back-blind than Wookiees or humans, but he didn't trust this pair. Well, he grunted, make your proposal. Remember, I owe you nothing for approaching me. The Wookiee, deep brown with a gloss of silver at the tips of his fur, wore a black bandolier of small-scaled hide. Maybe the Wookiee had chosen to wear reptile skin as a deliberate affront. To Trandoshans, most of a prey animal's value lay in its skin. Bossk would no more wear reptile skin than eat reptilian flesh. The fact that Wookiees and humans ate other mammals' flesh proved their bestiality. Chen Lambeck backed against the opposite bulkhead, leaving the small human vulnerable between them. Bossk smelled no fear on her. Chen Lambeck hooted like a cloud ape. After several verses, his apprentice held up a hand and quieted him. My Negra has connections among spacefaring Wookiees, she began. Bossk snapped, I don't trust criminals for information. The fact that you know their language marks you as an accomplice. It is their place to listen, not speak. Tinian balled her fists and planted them against her thin hips. My family kept Wookiees as slaves. The best way to control them was to learn their language. Do we understand each other? He refused to let her impress him. You call him your master now. Excuse me, she said, but I am translating. Chen Lambeck asks me to say that he has connections among spacefaring Wookiees. She swept a hank of fur behind her left ear, exposing its peculiar pink folds. One of them suggested a probable destination along the Millennium Falcon's last known course. A current sighting? Information from the Wookiee network? Bossk attended more closely. He would offer the scorekeeper his left arm for a chance to crack that network. Maybe even both arms, since he could regenerate them. Cracking the Wookiee's network could make him both wealthy and eternally secure. "Go on," he said. "Where are they headed?" The big silvertip hootled again. "He says," Tinian translated, "that the best way to catch a star captain who'll sign on a Wookiee co-pilot is to employ another Wookiee." Bossk kept his voice low-pitched, concealing his eagerness. "Where are they headed?" "First, we discuss forming a partnership. If you help me hunt down Chewbacca and his keeper, I will consider giving you 20% of my profit." The human narrowed her eyes. "Obviously, you think we are amateurs. 50% is traditional. It would still leave you more than you would earn without our help." She dared to haggle. Still, he saw ways of hedging this long shot. Chen Lambek's shimmering pelt was worth easily as much as Chewbacca's. The silvertip gene was recessive and rare. And this was the kind of lead he'd been looking for, not old data. He led them to believe he would give 30% of his take if they brought him to Chewbacca. Then he asked Tinian quietly, "How did the mighty Chewbacca earn enmity from another Wookiee?" Chen Lambek laid back his head and ooped mournfully. "His crime was unspeakable," Tinian answered. Then she added, "Chen doesn't discuss his past. Not with me. Certainly not with you." The past didn't matter. Whether or not Bossk located the Falcon, once he lured Chen Lambek on board his own ship, he was guaranteed a profit. The human was probably wanted somewhere, too. If not, slavers occasionally took spirited young human females. As for the hunter's creed, no bounty hunter ever betrayed another, unless the other hunter strayed first from creed regulations. But Bossk had fabricated creed violations before, and felt the scorekeeper smile on him. She loved clever betrayal. "Now," he said, "where are they headed?" "We would prefer finding a private place to talk." "There is no time for that." He kept his voice low and menacing. He wanted them to think he was trying to scare them off. "The other hunters are already heading for their ships." "Then we'll talk here." Tinian peered up the corridor. A human Imperial lackey wearing khaki fatigues dashed toward them. His heavy boots pounded the polished metal decking. Bossk steadied his blast rifle. The lackey careened around a corner and vanished up another too-bright passage. Bossk watched Tinian track the human with her eyes. He smelled her alarm at his approach, and her relief when he passed. Evidently, Imperials made her nervous. She didn't need to watch the corridors for her most dangerous enemy. He stood before her. The executor thrummed around Chen Lambek like a giant beast. He would be glad to leave its bowels, and he pitied the Imperial worms who spent their lives scurrying and scuttling in these passages. He spoke, then listened, as Tinian translated into Basic. "Wookiee sources," she explained, and he liked the condescension that she faked, "have evidently spotted Solo's ship on course for the Lomabu system. A renegade group of Wookiees is setting up another safe world there. We've heard that you blew the whistle on one such world earlier in your career." "Yes," Bossk snapped. At Gandolo 4, Bossk had hunted down several dozen escaped Wookiee slaves, trying to establish a safe haven. Bossk had been on the verge of skinning the lot, including the famous Chewbacca who was assisting with setup, when Captain Solo returned unannounced. Seeing the situation in progress, Solo had strafed the bounty hunter and his crew. They'd retreated into their larger, better-armed craft. Solo had landed the Millennium Falcon directly on top of it, collapsing its landing gear. Steam clouds had shot out of its hydraulics. Internal explosions had hinted at grave engine damage. Solo and Chewbacca had left Bossk alive, but trapped on board, humiliated, or so the story went. Chen Lambek's brother had related the tale firsthand. He had stood near Chewbacca, watching the desperate Wookiee's plight become hopeful, then hilarious. Chen imagined he could feel Bossk writhe at the memory. He spoke again, reminding Tinian of several details of their cover story. They'd concocted it before docking with the executor. She nodded soberly, then turned back to the big ugly lizard. "We think that the Rebel Alliance hopes to set up a base near the Wookiee Haven in the Lomabu system, now that they've been chased off Hoth. That would explain our report that Solo has taken the Falcon there, carrying several Rebel leaders. We could slip in before the Rebel fleet arrives, tag our quarry, and sky out before the Imperials catch on. We'll take our prisoners directly to Lord Vader." Bossk nodded. "I have not heard of the Lomabu system. Where is it from here?" "Well, we're near Anode. Lomabu is—" Chen watched Bossk closely. Now she would dangle the bait. "We're not exactly sure," she admitted. Bossk glared at Tinian, then Chen, then at Tinian again. He growled several words of Trandoshan deep in his throat. Then Choke gargled in Basic again. "Your information is worthless. You are worthless. I should—" Chen barked angrily. "Easy, you two," exclaimed Tinian. "We don't know where it is, but we know where to find out. We have to check a waypost along the Wookiee network." And that, as far as Chen knew, was a vital bit of truth they had spun into their cover story to sweeten the bait. Surely Bossk wanted— "Network," Bossk repeated slowly, his tongue flicked. "Excellent." He did. "It's dangerous," Tinian stressed, "especially for you and me, Bossk. The Wookiees will be serious about silencing any non-Wookiee that shows an interest in this locale." Bossk adjusted his rifle sling. "I refuse to travel in any ship but my own. I have a YV-666 light freighter modified for Wookiee hunting. Do you have a problem traveling in that?" Chen bared his teeth and answered evasively. It would have been easy to take Bossk down if they could talk him aboard their ship, but obviously Bossk was too intelligent to fall for that. "He doesn't," Tinian translated. "Neither do I, if it means getting the price on Chewbacca." Bossk finally stretched the lower half of his face in a reptilian smile. "I must warn you. If you tamper with any of my onboard systems, the Hound's tooth will retaliate." Of course it would. It was undoubtedly equipped with multiple defenses against Wookiee's strength. He told Tinian to inform Bossk that traveling with him would keep their expenses down, since they were only getting 15% apiece. As she translated, Chen sniffed the air. Bossk smelled as bitter as pain and as foul as death, but he hadn't become defensive. From that subtle clue, Chen guessed that Bossk already intended treachery. He wouldn't miss 30% of his take because he had no intention of paying it. Fair enough. If Chen had his way, Bossk would not collect one limp credit. Chen knew about the Trandoshan religion. Having his Jagannath score zeroed would hurt Bossk worse than ambushing and killing him. That would be a pleasure. To Tinian, Bossk looked impatient. He flexed his claws in rhythm, occasionally darting glances up the corridors. "I also expect you to pay half of my fueling costs," he said. In 3 years with Chen, Tinian had matured from a spoiled but sincere little rich girl into a seasoned resistance fighter. She sensed that Bossk was testing. 10%, she countered. "You'd make this trip without us, if you knew where to go." Bossk frowned. 20. Programming my onboard systems to watch you will take time I could spend hunting Chewbacca." "Then don't program them," she snapped. He curled a lip and hissed. She'd heard that Trandoshans found mercy, graciousness, and other weaknesses contemptible. 10, she repeated, "and that's generous." "Why did you enter the trade, human? Your kind generally hasn't the stomach for it." Tinian narrowed her eyes, an expression Trandoshans understood. "My capacity for kindness died 3 years ago. Criminals murdered my grandparents and my lover. My home was destroyed, and I put ground-side life behind me. I don't mind risking my life if the stakes are rewarding." Bossk stared, obviously thinking that through. Trandoshans took no lovers. Whenever they came back to Trandosha, they mated with a clutch mother, who struck their fancy, then returned to their work. But she'd had a lover, a fiancé. Tinian tried to keep the image of Day Azurjaman out of her mind's eye. Day's had been a gentle face, full of intelligence, with an odd silver streak marking one eyebrow. He'd been sensitive to the Force, a shrewd judge of character. Hard-working, too, and loyal to the death. Day had sacrificed himself to help her escape the imperial takeover of her grandparents' armament factory. Since that day, she had dedicated her life to helping bring down the Empire. The sooner she died, the sooner she'd rejoin Day. Meanwhile, she had a job to attempt. 15% of fuel. Bossk thrust out a clawed forearm. Tinian sensed that she'd won as much as Bossk was willing to give. She reached out and touched his scales. Bossk swung his arm against a bulkhead, pinning her hand. Chenlambek extended a paw and got the same treatment. Bossk demanded command, 2 against 1. And his ship. Those odds favored Bossk. "Now," said Bossk, "we will evaluate our resources." He enumerated the Houndstooth's firepower. Before he finished, Chenlambek tapped the floor with 1 foot, and even Tinian felt nervous, even though she had practically grown up in her grandparents' armament factory. Since leaving Druckenwell, she'd become even more competent with weapons, explosives, and armor. Knowledge helped make up for her small size and limited strength. Chenlambek's contributions to the three-way included his connections among the criminal Wookiee network, and a reputation even Bossk didn't question. The rest of their planning was simple for the moment. After visiting the Wookiee waypost, they would drift into the Lomabu system, fake the orbit of a rapidly moving planet-crossing asteroid, and keep all systems quiet. They would scout, using Bossk's small landing craft, locate the criminal Wookiee colony, and then draw out and trap Solo and his crew. Specific plans would wait until they found the Lomabu system. Tinian didn't mention their own plans. "Until we find Lomabu," added Bossk, "you will remain in your cabin." Tinian shrugged. She had no intention of remaining anywhere Bossk put her, and Lomabu 3 was no safe world. "We will be boarding with 300 kilos of gear. Which docking bay is your ship in?" Bossk blinked. She could almost see him wonder what they needed with a 300-kilo weight allowance. "Number 6, he gargled. "We'll be there in 20 minutes, she said. Chenlambek led Tinian up the passageway, glad to escape Bossk's brackish stench. He had been called onto this job by Kashyyyk, not just to help Chewbacca escape, but to double-cross Bossk and end his murderous operation. Chenlambek knew that the Trandoshan Pelt baiters' count numbered in the hundreds. He had lured that boast out of Bossk. The heat in Bosk's eye had warmed Chenlambek's blood. Once they put several turns of the passage between them and the Trandoshan, Chen slowed to a stroll. "Satisfied?" Tinian asked. Chenlambek had lost brothers and sisters to Trandoshan Pelt baiters. He told her it was a beginning. "It was exciting," she admitted. "For a few minutes I felt really alive." Chenlambek cuffed the small woman's shoulder. She understood Wookiee speech and gesture remarkably well, including the soft punch that meant full agreement. "I thought you probably did too," she answered. She turned a gammon grin on him. He counted echoing gray corridors as he strode past them. then turned up a dim side passage. After 20 long strides, he paused in front of a bulkhead. Tinian loosened her blaster in its low holster and took up a guard position. Chen crouched in front of a power access point. He extended one claw and pulled off a silver cube that matched the decorations on his bandolier. It would have fit on Tinian's palm. "About time," it scolded in a high feminine voice. "I've been ready for—" Chen closed one paw around the tiny positronic processor, too small to properly call a droid, and too personable to call anything else. Concealing flirt in his grip, he glanced up. "Still clear." Tinian stood like a statue with one hand over her blaster. Chen clipped Flirt to her secure perch on his bandolier down near his hip. "Lots of good data," Flirt chirped. "Inside information on the Millennium Falcon if you want it." "You wouldn't believe—" "We're not going after the Falcon," said Tinian. "Aw," squeaked Flirt. "I wanted to—" Chen growled another warning. Flirt stopped in mid-squeak. When she stayed quiet, she looked like just one more decorative cube. Chen had had the bandolier made specifically to camouflage her. He led the way out. They had other luggage to claim before boarding Bossk's ship. Bossk hurried to a different terminal in the Executor's troop quarters area. Working rapidly, he pulled down all the information on Chen Lambeck he could find. Unfortunately, the creature's hunt certificate was current. His acquisition list, filed under the underworld nickname the Raging Wookiee, was impressive. This would only raise the Jagannath score on his Pelt. Bossk clawed buttons until he'd called up the incomplete human title Tinian. She hadn't given a second name. The computer hesitated several seconds before spewing 2 wanted designations. One fit this human's description right down to extremity's body temperature. Few other races noticed that detail. It was one of many factors that made Trandoshans the best hunters. A modest reward for her capture was offered by the imperial governor of an industrial planet, Druckenwell. Apprenticed to a licensed hunter, she was temporarily invulnerable. This was one way minor criminals ducked justice. But once Chen Lambeck lay dead on his skinning table, she would be fair game. Her bounty was too low to make him fear her abilities, but high enough to cover fuel costs for his hunt. He needed only to get them aboard the Houndstooth. But his primary target was Chewbacca. He wasn't forgetting that rich bounty, nor his humiliation at Gandolo 4. For a microsecond, he made his way to Docking Bay 6, where the Houndstooth sat under bright lights, guarded by Imperial stormtroopers. 3 of the other hunt ships had already blasted off. The Hound glistened, too new to have collected a patina of scars, pits, and scorch marks. Aware of the staring stormtroopers, he marched stiff-legged to its ramp. "Bossk," he announced, "boarding." It took the Hound less than a second to check his voice pattern. "Confirmed," said a metallic baritone voice. Bossk liked a ship that could speak for itself. He'd paid extra for responsive programming. The Houndstooth dropped its port boarding ramp. He hustled up into the cockpit. Hurriedly, he checked his security systems, paying particular attention to the port sleeping cabin. Satisfied, he strode along a curving passage to one of his aft holds. His passengers would need enough space to store 300 kilos. Of what? Puzzling over the question, he flicked his tongue. Whatever they brought, the Hound soon would identify it, and Bossk soon would own it. He took up a position inside the Houndstooth's main airlock and waited for his boarding party. Tinian approached across the Executor's mirror-bright deck. She steered a repulsor locker with her left hand, keeping her right hand near the blaster that hung from her slouch belt. A black duffel hung over her left shoulder. "Welcome aboard the Houndstooth." "You and your companion will share the port cabin," he told her. "I left its hatch open. Walk directly in and stow your gear. I'll join you later." She steered into the ship's comfortable dimness. He turned his attention to the far more interesting sight of Chen Lambic leading 2 Imperial service droids. Each droid hauled a large storage locker, and the Wookiee hefted a weapons crate over his head. "What's in there?" Bossk addressed a squatty draft droid on 2 tractor treads. Chen Lambic growled unintelligibly. Bossk suspected he'd just been cursed. He flicked his tongue in reply, then pushed away from the bulkhead. "Follow me." He led aft out of the brilliant light, past the passenger cabin toward his smaller cargo bay, where he'd cleared a few meters of deck space. "Pilot here. Touch nothing else." Chen Lambic hooted at the service droids. They set down their burdens, swiveled on their treads, and squeaked back toward the passage, returning to the executor's droid pool. Bosk's huge red and bronze X-10D service droid rolled forward. Chen Lambic backed away from it, baring his teeth. "X-10D will secure your objects for flight." Abruptly, Bossk felt a presence behind him. He spun, automatically aiming his blast rifle. "Easy, Bossk." Tinian stalked into the cargo bay with both hands raised. "What is that monster?" "I told you to go to your cabin." Bossk let his rifle dangle again. The X-10D unit was no monster, but to humans and Wookiees, who needed excessive light to see clearly, the droid would look enormous. "That is my draft droid." Tinian walked around the gleaming red unit. Roughly Trandoshan in shape, the X-10D had retractable piston arms that could stretch out 3 meters, a massive conical torso, and self-propelling roller feet. "I suspected you 2 would need me to translate before everything was stowed where you wanted it," she said. Touching X-10D's glimmering chest, she added, "Maybe you won't." "I will tell your companion where to stack his lockers, and X-10D will secure them," Bossk answered. "On this ship, droids and Wookiees are ordered to listen, not speak." Chen Lambic growl-barked. "Some of this is delicate equipment," said Tinian. "Do you have lashing cables?" "My draft droid will anchor your gear," Chen Lambic hooted. "We want to watch," said Tinian. "Watch if you want." It took an hour to secure the pair's belongings. "Remember our bargain," Tinian said as X-10D returned to his position along the rear bulkhead. "We don't search your ship, you don't touch our equipment." "And you stay out of everything." Bossk pointed a long claw at her. Chen Lambic shook a hairy paw and roared. She glowered up at the Wookiee. "Of course not, Negra. Not this time." Bossk crossed his forearms and smiled. Evidently this pair was not perfectly cohesive. He could easily promise not to touch their gear. The Houndstooth's security scanners and its onboard computer were matchless. Other than the X-10D unit, he required no crew. The ship's intelligence also helped overcome Trandoshan's one real handicap. Other races' technology was not made for Trandoshan hands, and even the ship's special fittings were sometimes clumsy. He led them back to the Hound's airlock. As it hissed shut and he sealed the pair on board, he murmured worshipful thanks to the scorekeeper. He would use these passengers until he no longer needed them. Then he would start skinning. "We'll cut cables as soon as you're ready," he informed them. "I have acceleration chairs in the larger cargo hold." "I don't think I trust your acceleration chairs," answered Tinian. Bossk laughed deeply. "If I want your scalp and his pelt, I'll take them. But not before Lomabu 3. We all want Chewbacca and Solo. We'll capture them together." Tinian peered up the narrow passageway. She couldn't make out much detail. She knew Trandoshans saw in the infrared, but she didn't have IR goggles. She'd never owned a pair. "Where is this waypost?" Bossk clomped up behind her. "I need coordinates now." Chen hooted a series of numbers. Tinian repeated them. She added, "It's programmed to destroy any non-Wookiee that approaches. From the time we drop out of hyperspace, the houndstooth must maintain scanner and sensor silence and total shielding, unless Chen is the only one outside your shielded area." "I understand." Bossk flicked his tongue. "Shall I show you to the acceleration chairs now?" "We'll ride in our bunks." She adjusted her duffel. Bossk shrugged. "Suit yourself. Don't blame me if you get thrown around." Tinian ducked back into the sleeping cabin. Roughly 3 meters by 4, it was so dark that everything inside looked gray. Chen squeezed in after her, looking like a massive black shadow. Bossk's scaly back retreated up the main passage. She pulled out a Luma and shone it around. Bunks, storage compartments, also a small wash cabin, comfortably sized for her, but cramped for a Trandoshan or a Wookiee. Tinian swept her Luma up and down a bulkhead, looking for a power point. "Here," she said. It was at her shoulder level, an easy height for Bossk or Chenlambek to access. Chenlambek stowed his duffel inside a compartment. "Goody," Flirt chirped from her bandolier perch. "Did you get a look at that big droid? What a specimen!" A smooth, low thrum began. Tinian looked up at Chen and added ruefully, "Nicely tuned engines." Chen answered shortly. She knew he loved his little saucer-shaped Roshir, even though it was growing seedy. He must hate leaving it in the Executor's storage bay, paying Imperials by the day while they remained on board Bossk's ship. "If this goes well, we'll be able to pay parking for 50 years. If not, we won't care. Don't worry, Negrer." She gathered a handful of fur in one hand and tugged hard. Wookiee fur felt softer than it looked. Chen pulled Flirt off his bandolier. He held her in one massive hand while he ordered her to concentrate on securing their cabin. "Right," added Tinian. "Bossk wants to get to that waypost, but he's not going to leave us up and around." "So plug me in," Flirt exclaimed. She emitted a happy squeak as Chen pushed her connector into the power point. Then she hummed tunelessly her version of electronic contentment. Chen had inherited Flirt from a slain hunting companion. The other Wookiee, Chen had never named him to Tinian, had invented the illegal droid and programmed her to seduce an intelligent computer. Flirt could open data streams, shut down security, and substitute her owner's commands for the operator's, all without needing to plug into an information outlet. Any PowerPoint would do. Inside her titanium shell, the first centimeter was packed with sensor and antenna windings. But she wasn't dependable. Some jobs that sounded easy to Tinian took Flirt hours to accomplish. That was why they'd prepared 3 contingency plans. "She sounds happy." Tinian climbed onto the top bunk and strapped in, using heavy webbing that looked black in the dim light. If her eyes hadn't adjusted by now, they probably wouldn't. This light was too faint for humans. "I hope she hurries." Chen stood beside the 2 narrow bunks and braced himself against the deck and the upper bulkhead, where he would block Tinian's fall if she rolled. He wondered aloud if Bossk were operating the houndstooth alone. "If he is, the onboard computer's got to be more powerful than any we've ever seen." Tinian rolled onto her side and eyed Flirt. Chen muttered, "And our scaly friend has probably got connections in shipbuilding circles." He was probably listening, too. She added, "It's a good-looking ship." Chen grinned, showing teeth. He grunted several insults. Tinian grinned back. "He's probably got a translation program activated." Chen told Bossk what he could do with his translation program. Flirt sat glued like a Minoc to her bulkhead, introducing herself to the most powerful onboard computer she had ever encountered. Tinian guessed that the Hound was too intelligent a ship to be easily dazzled. But Flirt had better succeed before they reached the waypost. All of their plans required being conscious after that jump. The ship lurched. Tinian's feet hit the bulkhead. She'd learned to growl bark a few words in Shry-Wook, which translated literally as tongue of tree people. It was a wonderful language for expressing disgust. She howled, then added in Basic, "He doesn't mess around." Chen snorted. Tinian braced one arm against the bunk's inner bulkhead and the other against Chen's broad back. He had taken the place of the father she had only known in her imagination, strong and fearless. She'd first saved Chen's life back at Silver Station, where vengeful but stupid Ronauts tried to blow out a bulkhead and send everyone aboard on the final jump. Tinian had tracked down the Ronauts by the smell of their JL-12F, an explosive manufactured by one of IAT Armamen's competitors. She'd saved him again at Klein Colony, where a rebel acquisition had resisted Chen's unique style of rescue. They'd saved each other in Ukbot's dank warrens on a mission that failed. Acceleration became hard and steady. The aft bulkhead started to look and feel almost like a deck. Tinian rolled toward the bulkhead. It had been days since she'd slept well. Maybe a nap would... Something pricked her skin through the thin mattress. Bossk flicked his tongue. Success. They were both unconscious. "Hound," he called. "Disarm all cabin locks." "Confirmed," answered the Hound's baritone. He stalked up the corridor and touched out a code on his own cabin's hatch, disarming several more security circuits. When he'd modified the Hound for Wookiee hunting, he'd installed features to protect him in case of onboard escapes by enraged Wookiees, including the ability to fly the Hound from inside his starboard cabin. Still, he preferred the broad sweep of space visible on the bridge monitors. They included near and far infrared. Next, he checked on his passengers. Inside the port cabin, the Wookiee lay on the deck, breathing shallowly. The human did not react when he shook her shoulder. Pharmaceuticals made excellent equalizers. He drained the charges from their blasters and then rummaged through their cargo compartments. He hesitated over Chen's bowcaster, wanting to keep it, settling for removing its loading spring, then left the pair as they lay. "Record any activity in the passages," he instructed the Hound's tooth. "Confirmed," it answered. According to the Hound, they were headed for the outskirts of the Aida system. It seemed a logical place for a Wookiee waypost. Aida was solidly imperial but sparsely settled. When Tinian awoke, she felt ravenous. Chen bent over her, crooning, sounding concerned. "I'm awake," she groaned. "I must have slept awfully hard," he growled. "Drugged?" Tinian exclaimed. She sat up straight, glad to be alive. "Is Flirt having trouble?" Flirt squeaked softly. "You're safe now." Tinian slipped off her bunk. Her limbs bent stiffly. "What happened?" she asked the miniature droid. "Sub-Q injectors in the mattress and deck. The Hound's been programmed with both of your body weights. You were down for 3.5 days. No wonder Tinian had lost all sense of time. Chen asked Flirt if she'd gotten inside the Hound's security. "Not exactly inside," Flirt admitted softly. "He has accepted my presence, but he hasn't let me do much. Still," she chirped, "I've secured your cabin and brought up your lights. That's something." Instead of gray, the bulkheads glimmered steel blue, and Chen's silvery pelt shone. Now Tinian could see that the Hound had high overheads and long, narrow bunks. "Where's Bossk?" "In the cargo bay," trying to scan your weapons crate. Chen growled an elaborate threat. It's safe for the moment. So are you. That crate was a decoy anyway. Tinian rubbed her face and slipped into the wash cabin. She hoped Chen's boxy little siren hadn't met her match this time. If Flirt could insinuate herself inside the Hound's main security circuits before they jumped again, she and Chen ought to be able to overpower Bossk, restrain him, and deliver him wherever they could get the best price. Plan 1 counted entirely on Flirt, though. Tinian had yet to run a bounty mission that turned out simply. Bosk's gruff voice spoke from the bulkhead. Chen Lambeck, Tinian, I'm on my way to speak with you. How about dinner? Tinian called back. No reply. Chen whirled concern. I won't faint, she answered, but you must be starved. Flirt spoke up. Bossk just programmed the galley to deliver a big meal. You'd better dim our lights, Tinian suggested. He'll get suspicious if you don't. The bulkheads faded to gray again. Do we dare eat? Tinian asked Flirt. And where are we? Just a few degrees out from the waypost, Flirt answered. He hasn't doped your food. Tinian checked the charge on her blaster. Uh-oh, she said. It had been drained. Is yours zeroed too? Chen fingered his blaster, then examined his bowcaster. He yipped and pointed. Its loading spring had been removed. The hatch slid open. Come out and eat, said Bosk's voice, but Bossk didn't appear. The passageway was even darker than their cabin. She marched up the murky corridor, following her nose toward the galley. Bossk sat at a table, bending over a bowl full of wriggling red worms. He no longer wore his blast rifle. By this dim light, he looked drab-brown. Eat! He waved a forelimb at 2 plates set far from his own. Your food disgusts me. It's mutual, Tinian muttered, but whatever Bossk had prepared for her, it smelled splendid. On the other hand, raw plasboard with ground car fuel sauce would have been difficult to push away. She shoved in a mouthful before Chen sat down. Bossk flicked his tongue at his bowl. A worm vanished into his mouth with his tongue. She decided not to watch him anymore. Several minutes, and half a plateful later, she asked, Where are we? Near the Aida system and your waypost. Now I need your hairy master hunter's help. Chen Lambeck muttered at her for a while, questioning Bosk's competence, his taste in food, and the keeping quality of the egg he had hatched from. Tinian pretended to translate. Why didn't we drop out of hyperspace at the coordinates he gave you? In case he was trying to trap me, of course. Bossk shot out his tongue again. Chen Lambeck rumbled on. Tinian waited a reasonable time, then said, He says that you and I must take cover inside a sensor-screened hold while he makes contact. Bossk snarled. You will be my hostage in case he tries anything. This time, Chen said something that actually needed translating. Tinian repeated, You'll have to show him how to operate your ship's controls. No, I won't. My personal cabin is fully shielded, and I can run the Hound from inside it. Tinian turned to Chen. Will that work? She didn't relish the idea of being held hostage inside a shielded cabin. Chen told her it would. Several minutes later, he sat alone on the Hound's bridge. Bossk had locked down all controls, but Chen laid his forearms in deep troughs on the console and studied carefully. Evidently, Bossk used pressure against the trough surfaces to control thrusters in several directions. Main guns must be the right-hand claw hooks. He didn't see shield controls yet, but finding them would be Flirt's job. He had installed her under the navicomputer. By now, she should be absorbing data, dumping old memory to make room. A fuzzy object loomed ahead on the scanners. That must be the waypost. His contacts back on Kashyyyk had felt it wise not to tell him where to find Lomabu 3. a delaying tactic to give Flirt time to conquer the Hound's command circuits. Chen hoped to hear Flirt's announcement of success at any moment. Plan 1 was elegantly simple. The fuzzy object grew and resolved on twin trapezoidal forescreens. A drifting hunk of metal, it looked like a derelict ship. Sparkling microscopic debris swirled around it in rapid, furious orbits. The object seemed to invite scanner probing. Before he could touch any controls, his scanner screen lit. Up close, it still looked like a derelict ship. This was no waypost. A dim but distinct dance of tiny colored lights would have identified it as genuine. He should have known that Kashyyyk would never risk letting a Trandoshan see the coding ID of the network. But he had been promised something he would be able to read. He growled at the bridge's main microphone. Bossk must focus the scanners into the orbiting cloud and vary scan depth until something readable appeared. At every depth, it looked like spinning garbage. An eerie howling filled the cabin. Abruptly, he whirled soft amusement. Some brilliant underground operative had programmed the whirling debris to give an audible scanner reading. It sounded like hundreds of Wookiees singing simultaneously, each following the others in a spectacularly complex canon. Each voice repeated a series of numbers. Chen isolated one voice and followed it through the series. They were definitely coordinates, but where did the series break and start again? His young apprentice had worked as a musician during a brief undercover job. He growled at her. After several seconds, she answered in the language of his people. "Start," she woofed in an odd soprano. She paused a moment, then barked, "Now!" Chen punched digits into the Hound's navicomputer. The moment he completed a navigational sequence, its screen lit with a course, a very short course. The Lomabu system was Aida's near neighbor. He whispered to Flirt. Had she... "Not yet," she signaled. "Sorry." On to Plan 2, then. According to Kashyyyk's transmission, Imperial forces were scheming to entrap the rebel fleet, using several hundred Wookiee slaves as bait. The Wookiees had been shipped to Lomabu 3, a world recently depopulated for sedition against the Empire, and imprisoned there. Aida's imperial governor, Io Desnand, intended to ship in dozens of females and cubs and then stage an attack. Rebel ships would probably try to rescue the Wookiees, and Governor Desnand could offer the Empire a mass entrapment. Obviously, Desnand was after a fat promotion. Plan 2 involved liberating the Wookiee prisoners at Lomabu 3 and bringing down Bossk, one task at a time. In Plan 2, Chen, backed by Flirt and Tinian, would still have a clear advantage over Bossk, deserted by the Houndstooth. As soon as Flirt announced success, he and Tinian would subdue the big Trandoshan. Then Chen could attack the Lomabuan prison guards without having to watch his back. Plan 3 was more complicated, of course. It pitted Bossk against Imperial Governor Io Desnand, and timing would be crucial. Chen's alliance contacts, who had created the waypost, probably weren't far off. Their scanners might be trained on the Hound at this moment. He raised a hand in greeting. Tinian sat where she'd been told to sit, several meters away from Bossk, in the large starboard sleeping cabin. Bossk sat in front of a recessed console. His orange flight suit fit him better when he sat down. When he'd stood, it had bunched up on his back. His long greenish forearms lay in two deep, rounded grooves. He barely moved, but he seemed remarkably busy for someone who only needed to set a course. He must be feverishly probing that waypost. She already guessed it was false. Bossk must be bitterly disappointed. But in his mind, the Millennium Falcon would be almost in reach. He would probably recheck this waypost after he completed this mission. By then, it probably wouldn't exist. She chuckled. "What is it?" Bossk demanded. "What is funny?" The fact that we're almost there, she lied. Those Wookiees are trying to set up their safe world right under an Imperial governor's nose. Oh. Get back to your cabin, gargled Bossk. We will discuss strategy once I probe the Lomabu system. No drugs this time, she said sternly. Acceleration made it hard to turn the corner into their cabin. She braced against a bulkhead until Chen slipped in behind her. Quick, she urged. Chen was already unclipping Flirt from his bandolier. He plugged her in on the bulkhead. Security, Tinian scolded the miniature droid. Hurry! Extra G-forces darkened Tinian's vision at the edges before Flirt sank. You're secure. Tinian struggled onto her bunk and braced her feet against the aft bulkhead. Chen reached down over her and secured her webbing. Thanks, Tinian managed. Then she shut her eyes and waited for the lurch into hyperspace. Bossk frowned at his monitors. The Hound had jumped successfully. This would be a 2-hour hop, but one internal monitor had suddenly blanked. Had he lost power to the port cabin? Restore restraint systems inside the passenger cabin, he ordered. After a moment's hesitation, the Hound's baritone answered, The port cabin is fully secured. Would you like imagery from the starboard cabin? For a super-intelligent computer, it occasionally communicated like a prize idiot. That was one disadvantage of flying a new ship. Bossk exhaled sharply. Cancel request, he snarled. Almost immediately, Chen Lambic appeared at the bridge hatch. He woofled and pointed at the control troughs. Bossk would fix that short circuit later. The translation circuit echoed Chen Lambic's hooting before Bossk could shut it off and deny its existence. Translating into Pidgin Basic, it said, Want, sit, bridge. You made us sleep before. You need me up here. At Lomabu, we outnumbered. Bossk eyed the Wookiee's magnificent pelt. The Hound's Tooth is my co-pilot. I don't need you, Chen Lambic growled. The Hound offered, You don't need, but I fly under you. I want assist. Bossk kept his tongue behind his teeth. It would be entertaining to share the bridge with a Wookiee whose pelt he would soon peel. Sit, he directed Chen Lambic. But the Hound can immobilize you faster than you can touch me, and I can still kill your partner. He flipped his surveillance switch. The port cabin appeared on screen. Tinian crouched beside a bulkhead, trying to pry off a sheet of metal paneling with her fingernails. Bossk pointed at her image. If I find it necessary to immobilize you, he told Chen Lambic, I will kill her instantly. Chen Lambic muttered. Too dark up here, translated the Hound. It's light enough, said Bossk. Sit. Chen Lambic sat. You're back on watch, squeaked Flirt, or Bossk thinks so. Tinian slipped off her bunk. About time, she exclaimed. That must be one nasty computer. Not nasty, Flirt sounded prim. Just standoffish. I like a challenge. As long as you don't get us killed while we wait for you, sweet thing. Tinian smoothed her ship suit. Is it safe to explore the aft bays? If you take me along. Bossk thinks you're trying to take sheet metal off the bulkheads. That's creative. Tinian settled her belt over her hips. Besides a blaster, it held several tools that she'd need for exploring. This is a short jump. We'd better move fast. Open the hatch. It slid upward. I've put a loop into his surveillance program, Flirt explained. He'll see you try several bulkheads with your fingernails. Tinian kept her nails short, but that image would make sense to a clawed alien. How are you progressing with the Hound? Oh, Flirt said evasively, not as well as I'd like. He's one of those true blue incorruptible types. He was more vulnerable from the bridge. I had to concentrate on this cabin while I was there, or maybe I could have accomplished something. Chen had left Flirt with Tinian to protect her. Tinian had better make this trip aft worthwhile. Thanks, she said. Just don't let him see what I'm up to. Not me. Tinian grasped the small cube and twisted slightly. Flirt popped off the bulkhead into her palm. Tinian waited a few seconds in case an alarm rang. "Don't you trust me?" Flirt asked. "I don't trust anybody." Tinian stuck Flirt into a belt pouch, then slipped into the corridor. It was totally dark. Obviously, the infrared-competent Bossk wanted to keep his passengers as blind as possible. Tinian pulled a tiny luma out of one belt pocket and held it overhead. Riveted bulkheads curved in both directions, with inverted pyramidal fixtures along the ceiling. They looked like heat lamps. "Stop me if we approach anything dangerous," she whispered. She had barely reached the first side hatch when Flirt beeped. Tinian froze. Cautiously, she pulled Flirt out of the pouch. She held the little droid up to her mouth. "What is it?" she whispered. Flirt's voice was almost imperceptible. "Motion sensor," the droid answered. "One more step and you'll walk into its range." "Can I go backward?" "I think so." Tinian slid one foot backward, then the other. "Stop," said Flirt. Tinian froze again. "Now what?" "I think there's a pressure trap in the deck just behind you. Don't move either foot." Tinian held her position and swept Flirt in all directions. She sniffed the air cautiously. Her uncanny nose for explosives would be no help if the Hound's security features were electronic. "Okay," murmured Flirt. "The sensor's looking away." As Tinian scooted forward, she spotted a tiny swiveling eye high on one bulkhead, momentarily pointed in the other direction. She slid beneath as it made a backswing up the corridor. Then she slunk aft, staying as close as possible to the port bulkhead. At last, she reached two large hatches side by side. "These are secured," she told Flirt. "How are you going to get me in?" "There's got to be a power point close by." Tinian held up her luma. The opposite bulkhead looked smooth, except for seams and rivets. "Where?" "Take me across." She sprang over. The power point would have to be obvious, since Trandoshan fingers were clumsy. Tinian spotted an access well hidden in shadow. She shoved Flirt into it. "Hurry," she whispered. "I feel naked out here." Flirt didn't answer. She beeped and tinkled like a miniature music box. Behind Tinian, a hatch slid open. She spun around, drawing her blaster out of habit. Nothing happened. Of course, nothing also would have happened if she'd tried to fire the drained weapon. Disgusted, she holstered it again. "You're in," announced Flirt. Tinian plucked Flirt off the bulkhead. "Next time, give me a little warning," she grumbled. She sneaked into the cargo bay, leaving the hatch open. This wasn't the bay where they'd stored their precious lockers. Stowed along one wall, locked down by straps and hold-me's, but in plain sight, was an array of weapons. Force pikes, nasty-looking disruptors, knives, blast rifles, and tangle guns, all for hunting Wookiees who only wanted to be left in peace. Turning in place, Tinian spotted a long, shining table. She walked closer, holding her luma aloft. The table's surface threw reflections on the opposite bulkhead. A narrow channel ran along the table's edge, tilted toward a reservoir. At one narrow end of the table, a wicked-looking swivel hook hung retracted. A complex mechanism hovered above it, suspended from the upper bulkhead. With those long, stiff, clawed forelimbs, Bossk was not dexterous enough to use a skinning knife. The automated machinery would lower into place over a Wookiee corpse. Shuddering, Tinian tiptoed past a dip tank for curing fresh pelts. She did not find any of the acceleration chairs Bossk had claimed he had back here, but along the bulkhead farthest from the access hatch, she spotted 5 alcoves. Meat lockers. Equipped with minimal survival gear, they were standard features on hunt ships. The Roshir had 2, for containing live acquisitions. These stretched from deck to bulkhead, Wookiee size. Bossk would fit into one nicely. She knelt beside the nearest one, reached into her largest belt pouch, and pulled out a handful of tools. Her circuit meter identified a force field generator at the bottom of the locker. It was probably triggered by motion sensors to trap struggling prey inside. She'd like to jimmy one or all of these lockers. Abruptly, she felt afraid. "Is something happening?" she asked Flirt. "Bossk is busy on the bridge. You're safe." "I don't feel safe." Tinian's escape on Druckenwell still haunted her dreams. She had run and run and run, expecting to be spotted by her body heat and shot from behind by Imperials wearing infrared scanners. She didn't doubt that Bossk would kill her just as quickly if he caught her manipulating his equipment, and he saw in the infrared without scanners. She sprang up and shoved the tools back into her pouch. "We've got to get back." "You don't need to do that. I'll alert you if—" "I've got to get into the other bay, too. We're probably running out of time." Tinian hurried out through the hatch and across the passage. She shoved Flirt at the power point. "Shut that hatch and open the other." Locks clicked behind her. Tinian grabbed Flirt off the bulkhead and slipped across the passage again. She shone her Luma against this bay's inner bulkhead, found a hookup for Flirt, and plugged her in once more. Then she shone her Luma toward the other bulkhead. There was the pile. A shadow moved. Tinian's blood turned to ice water. Bossk's huge crimson and bronze droid rolled forward, halted, spun around, and returned to its station. "You're all right." Flirt's chirp dropped a doleful minor interval. "He's totally brainless." Tinian stared at the X-10D unit. "What?" she murmured. "The poor creature's only an extension of the houndstooth," Flirt explained. "He has no interior programming. What a pity, in a body like that." "Flirt," Tinian reprimanded the droid. "Chen needs a data chip out of Locker 2. Get me into it, fast." 10 minutes later, Flirt guided her back through the passageway. As they paused beneath one motion sensor, Flirt tweeted, "It's terrible." Tinian froze. "What is?" "That beautiful metal body and no brain." "Flirt?" Tinian ordered through gritted teeth. Imaginary eyes crawled around on the back of her neck. "Get me back to the cabin, now." The moment she reached Sanctuary, she pushed Flirt at her spot on the bulkhead. "Erase any record that we left this cabin," she directed. "You shouldn't worry so much," Flirt whistled. "I had you perfectly safe." Bossk glanced aside. Had he seen an alarm? Maybe, but it had shut itself off, so it could have been false. There were still a few bugs in the Hound, like its lapses of idiot speech. Chen Lambeck was obviously impressed by it, though, and Bossk had enjoyed showing it off. He shut down the simulator circuit and put the controls back online. "Back to your cabin," he growled. When the Wookiee didn't obey instantly, he touched a control that extended 2 fur-penetrating electrodes on the co-pilot's seat. Chen Lambeck sprang up, hooting. "Hurts," insisted the Hound's translator. "Hurts." "To the cabin." Bossk brandished the blast rifle he'd slung over his lap. The Wookiee shambled up the corridor, obviously stalling, but when Bossk peered into the port cabin, the human sat on the edge of her bunk. She fiddled with her thin, inadequate claws. "Where have you been?" he growled. "Prying off bulkheads?" She stared up at him, looking stupidly blank. "Here," she answered. "Where else?" He thought he caught the scent of the skinning bay on her clothing. Backing out the hatch, he secured it. What could she have been doing back there? He walked a circuit of the main corridor, including both bays. No alarms had been tripped. Returning to his bridge, he ran an extra security check. It, too, came up clean. Maybe he'd been mistaken. What if he hadn't? He keyed for more details from the security program. Immediately after leaving the Executor, the houndstooth had scanned his passengers' lockers. That scan revealed no metal, except in the weapons crate. He'd told it to try the lockers again. Whatever they'd brought along, if it wasn't weaponry, it needed to be analyzed. The second scan came up just as blank. Clothing or foodstuffs might have matched the scan's biochemical readings. He hadn't been presented with such an entertaining puzzle in several standard years. An hour's nap would refresh him, and the hound would wake him in time to drop back into real space, reactivating his alarms. He headed for his bunk. The moment Flirt declared that Bossk had locked himself into his cabin, Chenlambic set off on his own reconnoiter. To his delight, when he breached the central area he'd assumed was the Hound's main engine, he found a sleek scout ship. He paused, eyeing its lines. With or without subduing Bossk first, the time would soon come to run ground-side surveillance. He'd better be prepared for Plan 3, and for that he would need to unload those lockers into this scout ship. But where would he conceal something so large? Rounding the hull, he found two enormous empty holes on its exterior. Bossk had removed its guns. That made Chen certain that Bossk would send him and Tinian out in it. He peered into one hole. There was room inside to hide a Wookiee. Not him, but... He smiled bitterly. Inside his storage lockers were two of his carbon-frozen kinsmen, executed by the Empire. Their bodies had been dropped at a Wookiee outpost. Chenlambic had vowed to avenge their deaths by making use of those bodies. Bossk's droid, X-10D, was allegedly brainless, so Flirt could order X-10D to transfer the carbon freeze units into these gunnery sockets. He must also tell Flirt to make sure that the Hound's scanners still showed those lockers fully loaded. With Flirt's help, he sneaked next onto the bridge, carrying the data chip Tinian had retrieved. Before sitting down, he slipped Flirt into position under the navicomputer. Several long seconds later, she chirped, "You're secure." "Sort of." He demanded an explanation. "You'll be checked every 2 minutes. Whatever you want to do, move quickly." Almost instantly, she beeped a warning. He slouched over the controls, motionless, until she chirped, "Okay, I overrode without trouble." He growled a question. "No, don't pull any wires," she answered. "I'll hold off the Hound." Chen snatched a set of miniature tools out of his bandolier pouch. He pulled the main computer's cover, dropped it aside, then eyed internal circuitry. He almost had it figured out when Flirt beeped again. Hastily, he replaced the cover. It took 5 intervals before he located the spot to slide in that chip full of doctored data. Then he locked it in place and installed a parallel circuit around it. Just in time, too. They would reach Lomabu within half an hour. He growled a last question at Flirt. "Not yet," she chirruped. "Sorry." Then it was Plan 3. Leaving Flirt in position under the navicomputer in case she was close to a breakthrough, he retreated to the port cabin. Tinian crouched alongside the communication console, steadying herself against the starboard bulkhead, wearing a lightweight headset. So far, she heard only static. Bossk took the main chair with Chen as his co-pilot. Chen had told her that he thought Bossk was amused to let a Wookiee sit on his bridge. Bossk had brought up the bridge lights. His greenish scales showed orange undertones where the lights caught them. Bossk killed the hyperdrive. The Hound cut in its sublights. And a star system appeared. According to the navicomputer readout, it had 6 planets in erratic orbits. They looked more like electrons' orbitals than a flat planetary elliptic, as if the Lomabu system had been stirred by a passing stellar giant. Bossk had oriented the houndstooth to the 3rd planet's orbital plane. From this distance, it looked like a small blue disk with one moon. According to scanners, its surface was almost entirely covered by ocean, with long archipelagos marking arcs where tectonic plates collided. "Excellent," Bossk hissed. "Hound, establish a momentum course and cut engines." "Confirmed." the ship fell silent. To casual scanners, it would look like an eccentric asteroid passing the planet. Tinian watched Bossk flick a control alongside one of his forearm troughs. He'd have to utilize shipboard scanners sparingly now. Stray transmissions would be picked up by Imperial sentries, though he thought he was hiding from Wookiee sentinels. Chenlambic hooted. "Could the Falcon be in scanner range?" Tinian translated. Bossk eyed the boards. "If the Falcon is here at all," he said. "If you two have led me astray, I will sell you both to the highest bidder." The image of a colonial installation appeared on the Hound's main scanner. Chan had told Tinian it would correspond closely to the layout of Gandolo 4. Bossk flicked the scan once more, narrowing its search band. An irregular shape dropped toward the Lomabu colony. "Corellian YT-1300 freighter," announced the Hound's baritone. "Modified, heavily modified, illegally modified. Crew and passengers, 1 Wookiee, 2 humans." Bossk snapped off the board with a left foreclaw. "We have them," he exulted. Tinian thought she heard something. She touched her headphones. "Listen." Bossk amplified the transmission over a bridge speaker. "Very funny," drawled a male human, "but what we want is landing clearance. You going to give it, or shall I take this stuff and sell it back to not a cent?" "Solo," Bossk hissed. "Shut down all power." The bridge went dark. Tinian raised her tiny Luma inside one hand. Red light welled through her fingers. Plan 3, then. She'd hoped not to run Plan 3. "Chen, I hope you're ready." She pressed to her feet. "Let's go get them." Trying to sound cocky, she slapped her blaster. "It's time for a recharge, Bossk, and Chen needs his bowcaster." Bossk drew his forearms out of the troughs and rubbed them against each other. "Tinian, I want you and your Wookiee to determine Solo's likely avenues of escape. Count his allies and resources. This will be excellent experience to round out your apprenticeship." "We don't want to use those scanners again," she objected. Bossk flicked his tongue. "You're right. I'm sending you out in my scout craft, the Nashta Pup." The Pup was as sweet a scout ship as Chenlambic had ever crewed, despite its unfamiliar controls. And it had broadband transceivers, including Chen's personal favorite, single sideband. Its console curved around 2 black leather crew seats, with scanners mounted to create the illusion of looking out 2 trapezoidal windows, just as on the Houndstooth's bridge. Chen steered it back toward the Hound to get the feel of maneuvering. The bigger ship had popped a dorsal hatch to launch the Pup. Slowly it dropped shut behind them. Now it was easy to see that the oval Hound's primary engines lay under its main deck, with exhaust ports across its aft quarter. "Watch it," said Bosk's voice in his headphones. "I'm tracking you with a quad gun." "Why bother?" snapped Tinian. "We're practically unarmed." Chen ordered her to take the Pup down out of range, then pointed to one of his ears and over his shoulder toward the Houndstooth. Bossk was undoubtedly monitoring. She nodded and reached for the steering rods. The console wrapped around their crew chairs so neatly that either could fly the Pup comfortably. Tinian stroked a control rod. "I like this little scout." "Homesick for the Rocher," Chen barked. "I didn't ask to be born rich," she argued. "I just wish this were mine." Chenlambic kept digging in his tool pouch. He had left Flirt under the Hound's navicomputer and brought a remote relay. Now he wired the remote, which was bigger than Flirt herself, into the Pup's main communication line. Then he tapped out a code message to Flirt. "Power down Hound's audio receivers for 2 minutes. Then his translator for 10 minutes. His remote beeped twice for message received. A minute later, it beeped twice, then repeated, indicating that she'd succeeded. "I heard that," said Tinian. "Bossk will be deaf to us for 2 minutes." Howling assent, Chen closed his hands around the throttle rods. Lomabu 3 loomed closer on the visual screen. They were approaching the daylight side at high noon, out of the orange sun. The Imperials must not see them. Tinian talked rapidly into her headphone. "This message is for Governor Desnand. Repeat, Governor Io Desnand of the Aida system. We wish to report that the bounty hunter Bossk of Trandosha, repeat, bounty hunter, repeat, Bossk, is encroaching on your prison world Lomabu 3. He is engaged in unauthorized pelt baiting and means to abduct many of your laborers. This is another bounty hunter speaking. I have Bossk under observation, but he is also observing me. Can you make it worth my while to intercept him for you? Please reply on this frequency so that I may receive at 14:35 standard hours." That transmission was headed for Aida, not Lomabu. There'd be some subspace delay. Chen pointed at the chrono to warn Tinian that her 2 minutes were up. His 10 were about to begin. She switched off the transmitter. He let go of the throttle rods, and she took them. With the Imperial Governor alerted, now he must close the other side of their net. He must make a contact below. Even if Flirt failed him, the Wookiee prisoners must be alerted and freed. Chen switched the transmitter to a local frequency. Eerie howling noises filled the cabin. Single sideband was excellent for transmitting Wookiee speech, but difficult to tune for in BASIC. Bossk could listen to this all day and not understand a word. Maybe his translator would choke on it too. He called groundside. At first, nothing happened. There was always the chance that no illicit transmitter had been set up inside the prison camp, but Chen Lambic was willing to bet otherwise. "Try again," Tinian suggested. "We just dropped under the ionized atmospheric layer." Chen howled at the transceiver again. As Tinian brought the pup toward the target archipelago, the answering howl from his transceiver abruptly modulated. Chen grinned aside at Tinian, then answered. His mission took considerable explaining, particularly the part about landing and staging a firefight. The target island grew on the forescreen. "Explain about getting Bossk's confidence," Tinian hissed, steering out to sea on the island's west side. The prison compound was on the east shore. Chen Lambic tried again. Evidently his contact was an elderly male using amateur equipment, desperately afraid that guards would return soon. Chen didn't ask what threat the Imperials used to control his people. The pup's scanners had shown him heavy artillery, 2 turbolaser emplacements, plus plenty of unidentified metal technology. He needed to get those weapons into his people's hands. Tinian came in low over a dense green jungle, sweeping overland toward the island's east coast. Abruptly, Bossk's voice echoed in the cabin. "What's that? What are you doing?" His time was up. If Flirt silenced the pup any longer, Bossk might suspect her existence. Tinian leaned toward the pickup. "We're going to singe a little fur," she answered. "Shall we bring some back?" "If you know how," said Bossk. It sounded like a challenge. "Brace yourself, Chen," Tinian muttered. "We'll land in about 1 minute." She wasn't confident of her landing skills, and this was an unfamiliar ship, even though she liked it. Chen flipped her small hands off the controls and grasped the rods. He feathered the main engine and set down the pup near a cliff along the waterside. The compound would lie on a peninsula just north of that rocky promontory. "Impressive," Tinian said wistfully. He cuffed her shoulder and ordered her to thaw the lockers. They must be blood-warm before returning to the Hound. She gripped his forearm. "Be careful, Chen." He crooned a soft goodbye. Her concern pleased and honored him. He popped the hatch and climbed down onto Lomabu 3. A cool, damp wind blew across his nose, and he felt its chill in his furless palms. Its salty smell had an organic overlay of dead fish and floating plants. Beneath a brilliant blue sky, close to the site where the pup sat grounded, waves lapped at the jagged line of a long, broken wall. Green algae almost obscured a tracework of filigree just above waterline. Farther out, in sapphire blue water, other ruined walls formed a right-angled maze. The ruins barely broke the water, topped with broken stone and steel. He and Tinian had landed near an abandoned city. Within a few years, decades at the most, the vast sea would dissolve these remaining walls and wash them away, and all evidence of the Lomabwans' civilization would vanish. Chen Lambeck wondered what the Lomabwans had looked like, and what crime they had committed that drove the Empire to depopulate the entire world. Were the Lomabwans slaves, like his own people, or dead? He checked his bowcaster. Each piece fit again. It bothered him to know that Bossk was so familiar with Kashyk's weaponry. The rocky promontory that shielded the prison compound from his view would also keep prison guards from spotting the pup. He strode forward, staying inside a narrow grove of twiggy-brown trees that grew between the cliff's foot and a pale, sandy strand. Once he rounded the promontory, the prison compound became visible. Its gray walls rose in straight, perfect lines, freshly built and maintained by slave labor. It hunched at the other end of a slender peninsula, surrounded by a high metal fence. 4 tall, blocky towers loomed at the corners of its perimeter, and pale sand covered the peninsula's narrows between compound and mainland. Only one turbolaser emplacement was in bowcaster range. Destroying that weapon would help set the stage for an uprising. He crawled forward, staying low. Rocky soil scratched his palms. As he began to set his right palm on the sand, he realized that the sand was also crawling. He bent down to peer closer. What he had taken for a sandy beach was a vast colony of tiny creatures. Each was no larger than a grain of true sand, with legs or flagella so small he could only guess that they existed. The colony roiled as creatures climbed over each other and were climbed in turn. He judged from the damp, rocky soil above the crawling sand that the tide was going out. Although the creature's movement seemed random, the colony slowly retreated, following the tide. He dangled a bit of fur over the colony. It vanished where it touched down. Ravenous little beasts. Chen groped behind him into the glade, found a leaf-covered stick, and tossed it onto the crawling sand. It dissolved from beneath. This explained why the Imperials had selected this peninsula for a prison colony. Surrounded by voracious sand, even at low tide, he guessed, it could cage Wookiees who laughed at most weapons. Chen wondered if the Imperials had allowed one prisoner to escape in order to demonstrate the sand's appetite. But that was idle speculation. Now to create some heat for Bossk to see, so it would look as if there'd been a firefight, so he could realistically lead Bossk on with those bodies. Cautiously avoiding the sand, he crawled close to the guard tower. He chose an explosive quarrel from his bandolier. Keeping his elbows low, he fitted it to his bowcaster, aimed carefully, and let it fly. The tower erupted in orange flame. A human voice shouted. Chen sprang up and dashed for the promontory. He'd have liked to have seen how that explosion looked on Bossk's sensors, since it would show up in the middle of a scene that didn't exist. As he jogged up, Tinian stood close to the pup's boarding ladder. "Don't step on that sand," she cried. He roared agreement and a query as he clambered aboard. "I'm fine, but are you?" He vaulted into the cockpit and almost slipped in a red puddle. Tinian had lain the dead Wookiees between hatch and crew chairs. "No place else to put them," she apologized, climbing in after him. "As soon as I brought them out of freeze, they started bleeding." He demanded to know what she'd done with the carbon freeze units. "I lugged them up into the forest. I don't think Bossk will find them there." And hauled 2 Wookiees up the boarding ladder? She should have let him do that. Chen dropped into his chair and grasped the controls. Once berthed on the Hound, Tinian sprang the pup's hatch. Bossk stood below her, silhouetted by lights that looked almost normally bright. "Now the Wookiee criminals know that we're here," the Trandoshan snarled. "Is that all you accomplished?" "No," Tinian snarled back. "That wasn't difficult. Her back hurt. We also performed our evaluation. Solo and Chewbacca can't escape overland. There's a colony of living, eating sand all along the shoreline, so they'll have to take off upward if they try to escape us. Allies and resources? Plenty of Wookiees, but not as many as there were yesterday. Help us offload these pelts. There's still meat on them." "Pelts?" Bossk shuffled up to the main hatch and peered in. "Did you actually—" He fell silent. The fresh-looking corpses still lay bleeding on the deck. Chen Lambic sat his station, baring his teeth in a howl. Tinian translated accurately this time. "Criminals. A gift," she added, "just in case you still doubt us. Chen knocked off 2 sentries." Bossk reached down. He stroked one pelt, a rich brown tipped in black. "I had doubted that you would kill free Wookiees," he answered. "I believe you now. I accept your gift." "Sure you believe us." Tinian let Bossk manhandle the cooling bodies off the pup. Chen remained in his seat, curling his lip. He blinked rapidly, a sign of nausea. He asked her to tell Bossk something convincing. "He wants me to say," said Tinian, "that he finds your end of the hunting trade repugnant, but we understand financial necessity." Bossk summoned X-10D as they climbed down. "Excellent pelts." He stroked the other, which was solid black. "Prime condition. Maybe 150 years?" Chen turned his head. Fortunately, X-10D rolled into the docking bay and stopped Bossk from making Chen feel any sicker. The draft droid dragged both corpses up the passage toward the aft hold. Bossk followed, stepping lightly. Tinian recalled the skinning rack and dip tank. Chen slumped, shivering and keening. Hesitantly, Tinian laid a hand on his shoulder. When he didn't brush her off, she tightened it. Chen felt her strongest grip as a gentle caress. "They would rejoice," she whispered, "to know that in death they are helping end this carnage." He laid back his head and cried out softly. "And we've seen the way Bossk covets your pelt, Negger." She squeezed his shoulder again, then walked away from him, struck by the thought that if she lost Chen Lambic, she would be orphaned again. Her mother had abandoned her as a newborn. Her grandparents had been coldly murdered. Day lay crushed under tons of rubble. The Hound's deck blurred. She mustn't let him see her like this. "You'll notice he didn't order us back to our cabin, and we can see," she muttered. "Let's get something to eat." She set up the best meal she could find in the galley, including a huge scoop of red worms for Bossk. Now, if ever, she must act friendly. Trying not to gag, she told the Hound to call Chen and Bossk for dinner. Chen shambled in first and sat down. Bossk arrived smelling like disinfectant. "Ah, thank you, human." "Is that enough?" He sat down in front of the wriggling red mess. "For now. Friend Chen Lambic, you aren't eating." Chen stared at his plate, blinking and wrinkling his nose. Tinian cursed her thoughtlessness. Of course the ship smelled foul to him. Bossk had been skinning 2 Wookiees. How could Chen eat? Tinian dished herself a platter of cloned salt liquor ribs, then sat down. She had to act hearty, cheerful, determined. "What did he say?" Bossk asked. "Too much excitement." Tinian stripped the meat from a rib with her teeth and added, with her mouth full, "He'll calm down and eat later."
Listen, Bossk, things look good down there. Between Wookiees, we picked up a scanner confirmation of 2 human life forms. One corresponds exactly with the last known readout on Han Solo. Did you record it? Of course. She had loaded that data into the pup's main computer while Chen took out the guard tower. Like the other data chip, Chen had bought this one from a friend. "I have come up with a plan for live capture," Bossk announced. "Act glad," Tinian woofed at Chen Lambic. Chen lifted a rib, glared at it, curled back his lips, and growled. Then he stuffed it into his mouth and chewed. "Tell us what you want us to do," Tinian said. "I will drop out of orbit and draw off the freighter," Bossk answered. "You will neutralize the safe world's defenses. We will run a 2-pronged feint and attack. Then," Chen guessed out loud, "Bossk would abandon them." "He says," put in Tinian, "that the pup isn't armed heavily enough to do the defenses much damage." "It will be soon," Bossk answered. Chen ordered her to argue. "We could do you more good on board the Hound," offered Tinian. "She's a good ship." "I won't leave you two alone on her." Tinian had heard human children prattle. She imitated one she had particularly disliked. "I don't suppose you're willing to leave Chen Lambic alone on her and fly down with me, and you and Chen wouldn't fit onto the pup very well. What about sending Chen down and leaving me?" "Stop," said Bossk. "I trust you enough to arm the pup. This is merely the best way of accomplishing our mission." "All right," Tinian whined. After filling his belly with live meat, Bossk ordered Tinian on to watch. He locked Chen Lambic into their cabin, rechecked the Hound's security lock, and then finished skinning the second Wookiee. It was stiff now. Rigor had set in. He lifted the finished pelt, draping the moist, satiny underside over both forearms, and gently slid it into his dip tank. It vanished, bubbling into the tanning fluid. Delighted by the unexpected 2-pelt bonus, he airlocked the meat. Wookiee tasted oily and foul. He returned to the skinning bay. "X-10D," he called. "Unload the pup's weaponry." The bronze and crimson droid rolled forward, reached out his long grasping arms, and unlocked a cargo compartment. Holding one huge tube-shaped weapon at 2-meter arms distance, he swiveled around and grasped the other massive tube. Balanced now, he raised both arms and rolled up the main passage. Bossk followed. Inside the docking bay, the pup let off odd pops as it cooled. Working late with X-10D's help, he reinstalled the pup's guns. Then he sent X-10D back to the cargo bay for 2 items that mustn't be jarred. Several minutes later, X-10D returned at a measured crawl. He held his arms fully extended to their 3-meter length. His left hand carried a small canister. He held his right arm high to keep from dragging an enormous oblong torpedo. Bossk stood beside the pup's launch tube. "Load it," he ordered. "Use full caution." X-10D slid the huge flame carpet warhead down the tube, then sidled up against the pup's exterior to perform lockdown and pre-arming operations. Bossk flicked his tongue rapidly. The next time Chen Lambic fired on the Lomabu colony, that warhead would splash a hideous flammable adhesive over several square kilometers. Hundreds of Wookiees would suffer by Chen Lambic's hand, and Bossk would be avenged for Gandolo 4. The scorekeeper did not demand undamaged goods on her altar. Scorched pelts delighted her. Finally, he wired the small Oba gas dispenser into the pup's ventilation system. Unlike the benign serum he had tranquilized Chen Lambic and Tinian with, Oba gas caused permanent nerve disability in creatures smaller than Wookiees or Trandoshans. It would render Chen Lambic helpless, with his prize pelt intact.
but it would cripple Tinian. She traveled with a Wookiee. She knew she risked exposure to Wookiee disabling agents. At any rate, the small bounty offered on her didn't specify alive or undamaged. He ran a swift check of the scout ship. He had told them to disable the colony's defenses. Immediately after they launched the flame carpet and realized what they had done, he would gas them. The Hound would then remotely guide the pup into high orbit, where it would be easy to pick up after Bossk laid the Falcon crew low. That would be tricky, putting down a crew that included both humans and a Wookiee, but leaving all unharmed. He didn't dare risk Lord Darth Vader's wrath. X-10D, he ordered. Charge 6 injector missiles with McKelvey spores. I want them loaded in tube number 3 of the Hound. Most mammalian species suffered severe allergic reactions to McKelvey pollen, but reptiles did not. That would incapacitate Solo and his shipmates long enough for Bossk to board and capture. But the pollen was 50 years old, according to the Nalrithian dealer who'd sold it to him. If the Nalrithian lied, it could be much older. Was it still potent? He could easily perform an entertaining test. Once you've packed the injector missiles, put 2 grams of pollen into the Hound's ventilation system. X-10D swiveled and rolled away. As 1435 standard hours approached, Tinian stared at the display board. It wasn't too late to implement Plan 2. Come on, Flirt, finish the job. The little droid still nestled under the navicomputer, running permutations into the Hound's fail-safes. Maybe he had too many lockouts to juggle. Maybe he just kept outsmarting her. While they stayed locked in their game, the burden fell on Chen and Tinian. On schedule, a message appeared. Governor Io Desnan's office to informant. It read, Unauthorized pelt baiting at Lomabu 3 is subject to severe penalty. We will pay 40,000 credits for immediate live delivery of Trandoshan Bounty Hunter. Vader offered 800,000 for the Falcon's crew, but 40,000 was nothing to sneeze at. Tinian bent low. Flirt, we've got a bounty offer. Are you inside yet? After a few seconds, Flirt piped, I'm still trying. Abruptly, the bridge lights flickered off. Tinian sprang to her feet. Bossk just switched off all lighting in your wavelength range, Flirt exclaimed. You stay put, Tinian murmured, and keep trying. Trap him in a meat locker if you can. She sneezed delicately, then harder. A third sneeze followed. What was going on? She groped out of the pitch-dark command bridge and into the passageway. Each breath grew more difficult. Her eyes stung. She squeezed them shut. Tears streamed out around her eyelids and trickled into her mouth. Bossk flicked a comlink control. He could see perfectly by his infrared lamps. Tinian, Chen Lambeck, are you all right? I've had a malfunction in one of my fail-safes. Stay where you are. I'll be with you momentarily. Good. The pollen was still allergenic. Eagerly he marched up the corridor. He found Tinian in the passage, crouched near the door of their cabin. She held both hands pressed over her face and stifled a vehement sneeze. Are you all right? He asked. I'm terribly sorry. This system was designed to disable escaped acquisitions. She looked messy. Her nose and eyes poured fluid. No, she gulped and swallowed. I'm not all right. Very amusing. It will take me some time to repair the malfunction. Meanwhile, the pup has filtered air. The safest place for you and your partner is on board, on the next phase of our mission. Tinian tottered to her feet. First hatch on your left, Bossk reminded her. You'll find it by feel. I left it open. Bossk slapped a control and opened the cabin hatch. Chen Lambeck sat on his bunk. If Tinian looked bad, Chen Lambeck's misery was magnificent. His face, neck, and chest fur lay in a soaked, tangled mat. "Get to the pup," Bossk said gruffly, struggling not to laugh. "Tinian will fill you in. I'm headed for the bridge to try to fix things." Tinian sneezed violently, then groped on up the dark corridor. She couldn't see, and every breath hurt. Bossk's apology had sounded false. Trandoshans never apologized. She heard a miserable treble howl behind her. "Chen, are you there?" she wheezed. He howled again. "He wants us on board the pup. It's got filtered air." She sniffed hard and swallowed. His grumble sounded closer this time. She groped to the open hatch and stumbled through. Her footsteps clanked. This had to be the scout ship dock. Feeling her way along one bulkhead, she closed her hand around a breath mask. She shoved it over her nose and eyes, but it leaked top and bottom. It was the wrong shape for a human face. She gasped out a short Shriwook oath and dropped the useless rebreather. Long, strong, fur-covered hands closed on her shoulders and pushed her away from the bulkhead. Chen rumbled instructions. "Okay, take me in." She grabbed his big forearms and shut her eyes. Every time she cracked them open, they stung like they were full of biting insects. Chen leaped up the ladder like a whirlwind. She let go and slumped on the pup's deck, trying not to wipe her eyes. Her skin and clothing and Chen's fur were probably covered with the poisonous pollen. A light came on. "Are you on board?" Bossk's voice rasped over the pup's comm system. "Is it any better in there?" The pup started to vibrate. Bossk must be powering it up from the Hound's bridge. "Much," Tinian shouted without getting up. It's you." "Shake yourselves," Bossk ordered. "Turn your ventilation and filters on full. That will help." Chen announced that he'd found an air intake. Tinian squinted. Chen contorted himself in front of the intake, sweeping every centimeter of his body across it 3 or 4 times. Then he started picking half-dried detritus off his fur. If he wasn't going to stand on protocol, she wasn't either. She skinned out of her black shipsuit and flapped it in front of the vent, then shook her hair hard. At first, her sneezing and weeping got worse instead of better. Finally, they slacked off. She cracked one eye open. It no longer stung. She exhaled heavily. Chanlambic sat at the pup's controls, studiously eyeing the board. Tinian slipped back into her shipsuit and then flopped down beside him. "Are you ready?" Chen growled assent. Bossk's voice answered out of the comm. "I will launch you in 30 seconds. All of your systems check perfectly." Bossk smelled victory. After the pup accelerated well away from the Hound, he touched a control to arm the flame carpet warhead's detonator. Chanlambic had cocked the Obagas dispenser's trigger by switching the pup's ventilators to full power. Now he swiveled back to his navicomputer to make final calculations for his own approach. He keyed in a course that would take him close to the Wookiee colony. As soon as the pup fired and he gassed Chen and Tinian, their nasal membranes would be exquisitely sensitive, an unplanned dividend of the pollen test. He would dive. One swoop ought to draw the cocky Solo off-planet to chase him. He rotated his eyes inward. "Here I am, scorekeeper. Watch me." Chen held the pup on course for several minutes before Tinian finally stopped sneezing. Her nose still twitched. Inside, it felt as if someone had scraped it raw. On second thought, she smelled explosives that shouldn't be on board. Alarmed, she unbuckled, stood up, and leaned close to Chen's massive head. "Something's wrong," she murmured into the fur on one side of his neck. "I'm going to run a systems check." He whirled soft assent. They spent several minutes running through the pup's limited board. Nothing turned up. By then, Tinian's hands shook. Something was terribly wrong, and she couldn't find it. Chen tapped his relay to flirt, then flicked on the sideband and started transmitting again. His contact howled back, almost indistinguishable over sideband static. Tinian envisioned a prison compound full of Wookiees that was about to explode in violence. She hoped the pup wasn't about to explode too. She didn't think Bossk would sacrifice his scout ship just to kill them. What else could it be? As Chen called instructions into the pickup, a verbal-visual transmission appeared over the main board. Deepest security breached, I think. I'm faking a systems malfunction near one meat locker. It was from Flirt, still under Bossk's navicomputer. Chen Lambic howled. "Wait," Tinian cried. "Override that program. Run a check on the pup, now." What did Bossk do to prepare it for this mission? Bossk cackled softly at Tinian's startled cry to her partner. Too late for that, human. He intended to watch his victims approach the Wookiee colony, but for several minutes yet, they would be too far out to fire the flame carpet. A danger light blinked at one end of his console. "What is it?" he asked. "Not another false alarm, I hope." "Nothing wrong. No false alarm," answered the Hound. "X-10D lives in a meat locker, inside the skinning hold." "What?" Bossk clicked his foreclaws over his palm. It would have been just like that undersized human to tamper with the X-10D's circuitry. Humans had nasty, slender fingers. Or was this one of the Hound's idiot bugs? He confirmed that the pup could not fire for several minutes, then slipped off his seat and trotted aft. Flirt's voice shrieked over the relay. "He's off the bridge! Hurry! If there's anything you need to do, you're not monitored." "You just keep running those checks." Tinian's eyes had stopped watering, but her nose twitched. She couldn't identify the explosive she smelled. It must be an exotic, and that worried her. "Chen, talk to your friend down there. I'm going to start at one end of this scout and check all the circuits I can get access to. Something's wrong, and Flirt's not even trying to help." "I am, too," exclaimed the thin voice. "Bossk just walked into the cargo bay. He's walking right up to the meat locker I sat leaking. He's standing in front of it." Bossk located X-10D standing in his corner, obviously inactive. Next, he checked his meat lockers. Fluid dribbled out of a water nipple down the inner wall of the far left unit. Growling, he whacked a control at mid-bulkhead. That shut down a security circuit that would normally activate the locker's energy gates when prey inside tripped them. He grabbed a hydrospanner and stepped in. "He's getting inside," Flirt squeaked. "Hound, reactivate that energy gate. Hound, please, Hound." Chen Lambic roared at the pickup. "All right," hiccuping, Flirt switched programs. "He reinstalled your energy guns. Your torpedo launcher is operable again on heat seeker status." Torpedo. Explosives. "What's the warhead?" Tinian interrupted. Flirt answered seconds later. "It's called a flame carpet," she sang. "And you've—" Chen Lambic's furious roar drowned out Flirt's next words. Tinian recoiled too. Flame carpet warheads were appalling weapons manufactured by one of IAT Armament's less scrupulous competitors. Bossk had sent her and Chen Lambic to set air aflame, sear lungs and skin, shrivel fur. Flirt had kept talking. Tinian shoved gruesome imagery to the back of her mind. "What was that, Flirt? Please repeat." "I said," Flirt answered in a mincing voice, "that he also installed a dispensing canister into your vent system. It's full of a nerve poison called Oba gas. You'd better dump it." "Yeah, but first we've got to find it." Oba gas? Nerve poison? Tinian never would have smelled that. Bossk had triple-crossed them. Pollen, a flame carpet warhead, and now this. Chen leaped out of his seat. He dug his claws under the ventilation duct cover. To Tinian, the Nashta pup suddenly felt claustrophobic with too little air inside. "Thanks, Flirt," she breathed slowly and deliberately. "Can you still get Bossk?" "He's working inside the locker. He found the leak. I can't quite get Hound to cooperate.
He's very strong-willed. I'd like him if he weren't in our way," she added brightly. At least Bossk wasn't on the bridge watching. What could Tinian do with a flame-carpet warhead? She'd never dreamed she would have this responsibility. She must launch and destroy it so that no one would ever use it. It was irreversibly set on heat-seeker status. Maybe Bossk meant to gas them, then put the pup on autopilot and flame the Wookiee compound? She didn't have time to guess. She must decide what to do. She could send Bossk and his houndstooth straight to the Trandoshan scorekeeper. Lacking air to co-fuel its onboard flammables, that torpedo would impact the Hound like a huge, heavy projectile. No, the pup had no hyperdrive. Destroying the Hound would strand her and Chen in Imperial space. She knew she wasn't thinking clearly. The answer ought to be obvious. The pup's approach vector carried them out of the planet's shadow. Lomabu's sun rose above the world's blue crescent. The sun! She knew it was obvious. "Brace yourself, Chen," Tinian exclaimed. She rotated the pup 120 degrees, aimed the torpedo launcher's snout directly at Lomabu's sun, and fired. The pup lurched. Chen hit his head on an overhead and howled. Tinian held her breath and tracked the warhead. After a quick 3 count, its onboard rockets kicked on. It streaked sunward. Several hundred degrees of heat wouldn't harm anything there. Grandfather Ayat would have smiled. Evidently, Bossk hadn't seen her launch the warhead because nothing happened immediately. Tinian nosed the pup groundward. "Chen, how's it going in there?" They still had far too much altitude to eject. If Bossk gassed them, they were trapped. Chen stood with one long, hairy arm jammed up the ventilation duct. He turned his head, pushed his arm harder, and groaned. Tinian bit her lip. If Bossk got back to the bridge, he would know she'd fired the warhead. He would know she'd betrayed him, and warheads weren't easy to procure. "Flirt, are you getting close?" "Maybe," chirped the little droid. "He's still working. Keep Bossk off the bridge, or it's our lives." "I'm trying," Flirt insisted. "If you'd leave me alone—" "Will do," Tinian answered. As Chenlambek twisted a piece of metal off one console and shoved it up the ventilation duct, Tinian steered toward colonial space. This time they approached from the east, over water. Scanning a shimmery blue horizon, Tinian spotted the 4 looming guard towers. The Imperials would be on intruder watch this time. As if to confirm Tinian's thought, a blast of turbolaser fire flashed from one tower. It barely missed the pup. Tinian hated being shot at. Gulping, she swept both hands over its board. "Chen, where are our shields?" He howled. "None," she cried. A grizzled Wookiee spotted the tower guards firing. Whispers inside the compound had told him to watch for an attack. He sprinted toward the southeast guard tower. All around him, Wookiee slaves dropped their loads and attacked their overseers. A human arm flew. Approval thundered from 100 Wookiee throats. The prisoners drove their guards into the tower. The Empire may have found the Wookiees of Kashyyyk defenseless, but it had taught them to fight back. A louder roar swept in from over the sea. Imperial lasers tracked it for several blasts. Then the gunners swiveled their turbolasers inward. A long metal snout pointed into the compound. At this range, the gunners didn't miss. Soil, sand, and duracrete, and a dozen prisoners, vaporized in a fiery flash. The shock wave knocked the ancient Wookiee to his knees. He scrambled around the raw new crater toward the guard tower. The turbolaser could not track him there. Other surviving Wookiees grappled with Imperials along its duracrete wall. "Surrender!" boomed a voice out of the guard tower. "Surrender now, and you will not be harmed." The Wookiee slaves answered with angry, hopeless roars and kept fighting. A sortie of heavily armed troopers spilled out of the tower's main door. They drove the enraged Wookiees out into the open. Craning his neck to look up at the tower, the old Wookiee stared down at turbolaser's muzzle.
A human in a black officer's uniform stood beside it. "Send off a distress signal," he screeched at an underling wearing khaki. "Get help! Get Desmond! Immediately!" Chen Lambic still stood groping inside the ventilator, utterly stymied. He could not disengage the gas dispenser. Flirt had not managed to trap Bossk, and his shoulder throbbed as if he had torn the rotator cuff, trying to squeeze one more centimeter of length into his reach. "They're transmitting." Tinian leaned against a throttle rod. The scout ship tilted. Chen braced himself to pull G standing up, but he did not pull his arm out of the ventilator. He roared a question at Flirt. "Easily," Flirt chirped. "Hound likes jamming transmissions. He told me—" "Have you got Bossk?" Tinian interrupted. "Still working on it," Flirt sang. "Leave me alone." "Forget jamming, then," exclaimed Tinian. "We'll—" "Oops," chirruped Flirt's voice. Chen snatched out his arm. Flirt sounded sheepish. "We've got alarms going off all over the ship." Chen pounded the bulkhead beyond frustration. There was nothing he could do now. Bossk would leap out of the locker and run to the bridge. Then Chen and Tinian would start breathing Oba gas. He shouted at her to steer the pup inland and prepare to eject. They'd be stranded, but alive. "They've still got 600 Wookiees pinned down by that turbo laser," exclaimed Tinian. "I could blow out the main gun before Bossk got us." The pup lurched as she positioned to make another pass. For such a small thing, she surprised him with her courage. Chen sank into his chair. Another alarm? Startled, Bossk dropped his hydrospanner. "X-10D," he shouted. "Get over here." As the big droid rolled toward him, a white security light near the top of the locker blinked back on. Bossk lunged for the locker's edge. Energy sizzled around him. It threw him back inside with scorched scales and a bruised forehead. "Deactivate that force lock," he shouted. X-10D rolled one more meter forward. He hesitated as if listening to another voice, and then swiveled in place. He made a full turn, then another. Then he returned to his spot near the bulkhead. "Wait!" Flirt exclaimed. "What?" Tinian held course. In 5 more seconds she'd have that guard tower in range. "I've got him!" cried Flirt. "The Hound just gave me security clear." "Don't talk!" Tinian exclaimed. "Hold him!" The little droid must have finally hit the right code permutation. "Use X-10D to keep that locker secure." "I will." Tinian squeezed a firing stud as Chen put a Wookiee's strength into the control yoke. An energy flash lit the pup's cabin. "Yes," Flirt squeaked. Then her voice dropped in pitch. She almost purred. "Hound, you are magnificent. You are wonderful. Full command recognition," she reported to Chen and Tinian. "Hound," she purred again. "Double seal that locker and keep X-10D on guard." Chen swooped several hundred meters skyward. Wookiees scattered out of the fresh crater dug by the guard's turbolaser blast. Imperials stood along the fences, raining small arms fire on their maddened slaves. The remaining turbolaser cannon tracked the pup. Chen Lambic jinked in all 3 dimensions, looping back. Closer, closer. Tinian held her breath. He fired. The tower exploded in a hail of gleaming fragments. Chen Lambic pushed the throttle fully forward, toward open space and the hound's tooth. Tinian concentrated on breathing slowly. Just a little farther, just a little longer. If Bossk escaped, he'd gas them in an instant. Even a malfunction could still paralyze or kill her. Wait, wasn't she unafraid of dying? She searched her feelings. She had missed Day so deeply and desperately for so long that no other emotion began to fill her heart emptiness. But she mattered to Chen Lambic. She wanted to protect him in return. And she mattered to herself. She had talents and skills to contribute to the galactic struggle. The rebels had lost Day. If she fought on, She might help compensate for that loss. "I'm sorry, Day," she murmured as his face sprang into her mind. "I want to be with you, but I'd like to live. You understand, don't you?" The hound grew on the 4 sensor screen. If she wanted to live, she'd better think through the next few minutes. That allergen, whatever it had been, still floated all over the houndstooth. "Flirt," she called. "Something in the hound's air made Chen and me sick. Can you hold Bossk and still do anything about counteracting it?" Flirt hesitated a moment, then called back. "It's McKebvy pollen. Strong histamine reaction in mammals, but not reptiles. Hound just locked on his full air filtration for me. If you can wait a few hours, it'll clear out." "Not on your life," muttered Tinian. She looked around the noshed-up pup. "Chen, what could we use for breath masks?" He whirled soft amusement. "Not for the nerve gas," she punched his shoulder, "but we're going back to a ship full of pollen." He held up one arm and flicked its long underfare. His suggestion was long and complex. "Yeah," she exclaimed. "Your fur attracts it like crazy." By the time Flirt popped the hound's docking hatch, Chen and Tinian wore makeshift masks, knotted from Tinian's black ship suit sleeves, stuffed with Chen's fur. Chen landed the pup inside the hound's docking bay. Instantly, Tinian dove out. Her eyes streamed, but she could breathe. Chen pushed past her and sprinted up the corridor. Blinking hard, she locked down and sealed the pup, leaving the Oba gas canister for later. Then she followed Chen at a mad dash. Bossk struggled inside one meat locker, bouncing off the energy field and thrashing against interior walls with a Trandoshan's tremendous strength. Chen stood outside the locker, one fist on his hip and the other hand holding his breath mask, laughing hysterically. The huge drone droid had stationed itself at a control board with one arm extended, anchoring the energy field's activation switch on. The field was transparent except when Bossk's touch turned it to glimmering sparks. Chenlambik threw back his head. Tinian covered her ears and grinned as his victory cry rattled bulkheads. "Nice work, Flirt," Tinian said aloud. A throaty, feminine voice answered, "You're welcome, Tinian." "Flirt?" Incredulous, she turned to circle in place. Who was this? "What would you like next?" The voice sounded sultry enough to steam Baccarin butternewts. "It doesn't sound like you." The bulkhead laughed in a sexy contralto. "I'm using Hound's voice simulator. Isn't he wonderful?" Chenlambik answered gruffly, but his blue eyes twinkled over his makeshift mask. "Will do," Flirt purred. "Next stop, Aida System and Governor Io Desnand. I hear there's a nice reward offered for a certain scaly passenger of ours." Bossk thrashed, "I will destroy this ship. I will take all of you with me to the scorekeeper." He couldn't, from in there. Could he? "I have fail-safes everywhere." He reached overhead and hooked 2 claws into an overhead panel. Tinian's chest constricted. "Flirt," she shouted. "Be sure the Hound heard that. Bossk wants to blow it up." "Oh, he did," crooned Flirt. "He just let me remove Bossk from all command circuits." The Trandoshan villain flung the overhead panel at the energy field. Instantly he vanished behind an opaque shower of sparks. "Don't worry," Flirt purred. "We shut down that destruct circuit." "We?" asked Tinian. "Hound and I. Who else?" "Chen," Tinian murmured, rubbing her bare arms. "We have an acquisition to deliver." It took 3 of Governor Desnand's stormtroopers wearing power gloves to wrestle Bossk out of the locker. An Imperial in khaki fatigues and a slouch cap handed Tinian a credit chit. "There you are, Madam Helenica. 40,000 credits minus 3,000 for our stormtrooper services." That sounded like a bargain to Tinian. They stood on a huge, crowded landing platform where Chenlambic had landed the Hound. This had seemed the only way to transfer Bossk into custody. 3,000? She protested for form's sake. That's robbery. It's— I suggest you leave Aida immediately, answered the Imperial, before we run a background check on you and your partner. Only peacekeeping regulations keep you low characters under control. I suspect— Very good, sir. Tinian backed away from the man. Thank you, sir. Good day. She spun on one heel and sprinted toward the Hound's landing ramp. Bossk crouched on a prison cell bench. His claws twitched. He'd tried gouging stripes in these walls, but they were coated with transparasteel. The stormtrooper outside snapped to attention. Imperial Governor Io Desmond, a tall, plump marshmallow of a human who would not have dared challenge Bossk on equal footing, strode up and stopped outside the force-shielded opening. An even plumper woman stood beside him. She hung on his arm like a growth, batting false eyelashes full of delicate veins. Bossk half expected them to flutter off and join some swarm of winged insects. "Oh," she exclaimed, "you were right, Io. He's enormous." Bossk glowered. "You ruined my chances for promotion, bounty hunter," Desmond said darkly. "Any last requests?" "Promotion?" Bossk shouted. "What are you talking about? Those Wookiees—" "Were bait in a trap, bounty hunter. Instead of the rebel fleet, I caught one miserable lizard. At least now I can make good on a promise I made Phoebe 2 years ago." He encircled the woman's shoulders with one arm. Her bloodthirsty smile chilled Bossk. It made him picture the scorekeeper wearing a human mask. "I've always wanted a lizard skin gown," she cooed. "Full length, and only seamless will do, or it's not authentic. Yes, Io." She tilted her head and pressed one fleshy cheek against his hand. "This will be lovely." Bossk charged the force field. It blew him toes over topside against the back wall. "I'm innocent," he cried, springing up to stagger forward. "I had nothing to do with your plan, Desmond. I knew nothing about it. I still know nothing." Arm in arm, the pair strolled out of sight. Bossk stared after them, disbelieving. He was to be skinned? Zeroed? To grace that creature's wardrobe instead of the scorekeeper's altar? He plunged to his knees and started digging. He'd find a way out, retrieve his ship, and continue the hunt. Somehow. Tinian stretched out in the Hound's port sleeping cabin. The Hound was temporarily grounded back on Lomabu 3, inside the prison compound. Chen had claimed the starboard cabin, formerly Bossk's. Its bunk was longer and broader than either port bunk. Flirt had transferred command capability to both sleeping cabins. To Chen's surprise, but not Tinian's, Flirt had wailed every time they tried disengaging her from the Hound. Finally, Chen plugged her in on X-10D's PowerPoint and left her there. She was one happy droid now, with a large, strong body. All it needed, she claimed, was a soft blue detail job. Flirt had spent most of the jump back to Lomabu inside the Hound's programming, emerging occasionally to announce that she'd found some amazing new capability. "This ship can change course in the middle of a hyperspace jump. Hound, you're magnificent." "Hound has an armament circuit with built-in function echoes. I'm not sure how they work, but you could fire both quad guns on full power simultaneously. Listen, Tinian, Hound knows how to hover suborbital with full shields to the ventral surface." And that was how they had finished off the compound's Imperial overseers. The Hound had dropped, hovering, fully shielded, as Chen and Tinian doubled up as gunners. They'd landed inside the new crater, ready to take on prisoners. But the Wookiees hadn't left any Imperials whole. The sands feasted that day. This evening, Chanlambek was celebrating off-ship with his liberated kinfolk. Tinian had solemnly sprinkled a ritual handful of dirt over the pelts Chen buried. Then she'd danced 3 rounds of the circle, gripping his enormous hand on one side and a friendly stranger's on the other. But after that, she simply hadn't been able to keep up with reveling Wookiees. Tomorrow, or maybe the next day, Tinian guessed from the noise outside, they would squeeze everyone on board and hit hyperspace before Io Desnan could send troops. The Hound could only manage a short jump carrying 593 Wookiees, which would be a tremendous burden on life support. But Flirt insisted Hound could reach Aida. From there, Chen's alliance contacts could shuttle passengers to other systems. He had taken her aside and laid both hands on her head, declaring her apprenticeship fulfilled, asking her to stay on as his partner and friend. She had half a ship now, 18,000 credits, and full hunt status. For the first time in 2 years, she felt wealthy. Chanlambek gave away most of his acquisition money. Maybe she should, too. On the other hand, that imperial stuffed shirt had called her a low character. She sniffed her second-best black ship suit, the best one that still had sleeves. Maybe she ought to think about buying some new clothes. She yawned luxuriously. She'd decide later. Winded, Chanlambek dropped out of the circle dance and sat down on an empty stormtrooper helmet. The Hound filled the prison yard's center, shining like a smooth, brilliant ice floe under white prison lights. He felt vaguely disloyal about admiring it so keenly. He would miss the Roshir. He extended his claws and ran them through feathery fur that dangled from his left forearm. He didn't think of himself as vain, but he liked his pelt. Right where it was.